Daily Words of God. The work of man stays within a range and is limited. One person can only do work of a certain phase and cannot do the work of the entire era. Otherwise, he would lead people into the midst of rules. The work of man can only apply to a particular time or phase. This is because man's experience has its scope. One cannot compare the work of man with the work of God. Man's ways of practice and his knowledge of the truth are all applicable to a particular scope. You cannot say that the path man treads is completely the will of the Holy Spirit, because man can only be enlightened by the Holy Spirit and cannot be completely filled with the Holy Spirit. The things man can experience are all within the scope of normal humanity and cannot exceed the range of thoughts in the normal human mind. All those who can live out the reality of the truth experience within this range. When they experience the truth, it is always an experience of normal human life, enlightened by the Holy Spirit. It is not a way of experiencing that deviates from normal human life. They experience the truth, enlightened by the Holy Spirit, on the foundation of living their human lives. Moreover, this truth varies from person to person, and its depth is related to the state of the person. One can only say that the path they walk is the normal human life of someone pursuing the truth, and it may be called the path walked by a normal person enlightened by the Holy Spirit. One cannot say that the path they walk is the path the Holy Spirit takes. In normal human experience, because people who pursue are not the same, the work of the Holy Spirit is also not the same. In addition, because the environments people experience and the ranges of their experience are not the same, and because of the admixture of their mind and thoughts, their experience is mixed to different degrees. Each person understands a truth according to their different individual conditions. Their understanding of the real meaning of the truth is not complete and is only one or several aspects of it. The scope of the truth man experiences differs from person to person in line with each person's conditions. In this way, the knowledge of the same truth, as expressed by different people, is not the same. This is to say, man's experience always has limitations and cannot completely represent the will of the Holy Spirit, nor can the work of man be perceived as the work of God, even if what is expressed by man corresponds very closely to God's will, and even if the experience of man is very close to the perfecting work that the Holy Spirit performs. Man can only be God's servant, doing the work that God entrusts to him. Man can only express knowledge enlightened by the Holy Spirit and truths obtained from his personal experiences. Man is unqualified and does not meet the conditions to be the outlet of the Holy Spirit. He is not entitled to say that his work is the work of God. Man has man's working principles, and all men have different experiences and possess varying conditions. Man's work includes all his experiences under the enlightenment of the Holy Spirit. These experiences can only represent man's being and do not represent the being of God, or the will of the Holy Spirit. Therefore, the path man walks cannot be said to be the path walked by the Holy Spirit, because the work of man cannot represent the work of God, and man's work and man's experience are not the complete will of the Holy Spirit. Man's work is susceptible to falling into rules, and the method of his work is easily confined to a limited scope, and is unable to lead people to a free way. Most followers live within a limited scope, and their way of experiencing is also limited in its scope. Man's experience is always limited. The method of his work is also limited to a few types, and cannot be compared with the work of the Holy Spirit or the work of God Himself. This is because man's experience, in the end, is limited. However God does His work, it is unbound by rules. However it is done, it is not limited to a single method. There are no rules whatsoever to God's work. All His work is released and free. No matter how much time man spends following Him, he cannot distill any laws that govern God's ways of working. Although His work is principled, it is always done in new ways and always has new developments, and it is beyond man's reach. In a single period, God may have several different types of work and different ways of leading people, making it so people always have new entries and changes. You cannot discern the laws of His work because He is always working in new ways, and only thus do followers of God not become bound by rules. The work of God Himself always avoids people's notions and counters them. Only those who follow and pursue Him with a true heart can have their dispositions transformed and be able to live freely, not subjected to any rules or restrained by any religious notions. The work of man makes demands of people based on his own experience and what he himself can achieve. The standard of these requirements is limited within a certain scope, and the methods of practice are also very limited. Followers thus unconsciously live within this limited scope. As time passes, these things become rules and rituals. If the work of one period is led by someone who has not undergone God's personal perfecting and not received judgment, his followers will all become religionists and experts in resisting God. Therefore, if someone is a qualified leader, that person must have undergone judgment and accepted being perfected. Those who have not undergone judgment, even though they may have the work of the Holy Spirit, express only vague and unreal things. With time, they will lead people into vague and supernatural rules. The work that God performs does not accord with the flesh of man. It does not accord with man's thoughts, but counters man's notions. It is not tainted with vague religious colorings. The results of God's work cannot be achieved by someone who has not been perfected by Him. They are beyond the reach of man's thinking.